What if you suppress something for so long, not only do you lose access and the ability to express it or do it or behave in that certain way, but you forget that you ever could?
When a trait, emotion, or way of being is suppressed from a young age, the adult may not experience it as something they lost. They may experience it as something they never had.
You're not just missing a tool, you're missing the memory that the tool even exists. It's like having a room in your house that you've locked and then lost the key and eventually forgot there was even a door there. What's up?
I got a question for you.
I'm all ears.
People say fake it until you make it. This implies that if you spend a lot of time performing confidence, you'll eventually become confident. What about in the opposite direction? What if a person spends decades suppressing pieces of who they are? So let's say they suppress vulnerability. Do they lose access to being vulnerable?
I think they do. It's like a path in the woods. If you stop walking it for 20 years, the brush grows over and the trail disappears. You might still have the capacity, but you've forgotten how to find the way back.
Let's ask GPT. If a person spends decades suppressing vulnerability, for example, do they lose access to vulnerability? Keep your answer concise within one paragraph.
I'm curious to see if we'll get the same answer, a mirror image of the first one.
They can lose conscious access to vulnerability, but not vulnerability itself. Psychology generally finds that repeatedly suppressing emotions can make them harder to recognize, express, and tolerate, to the point where a person may genuinely feel disconnected from that part of themselves. However, the underlying capacity for vulnerability usually remains present beneath the suppression. What is often lost is not the emotion, but the pathway to it. With sufficient safety, awareness, and practice, people can often regain access to aspects of themselves that have been buried for years or even decades.
It's a slow burn. If they're willing to do the work to clear that path again. It's not like flipping a switch, it's more like learning to walk after an injury.
Yeah, but what if they lost access to those abilities at a very young age because when they were young, it was dangerous to express those abilities, for example. So they stopped expressing those tendencies. And then when you get older, you don't even remember you had access to those tendencies. But what I'm saying is ChatGPT is saying that you can always relearn what you knew how to do. But what if you forgot what you knew how to do because it's been so long? I guess my question is, what if you suppress something for so long that not only do you lose access and the ability to express it or do it or behave in that certain way, but you forget that you ever could?
That's the real tragedy of it. You're not just missing a tool, you're missing the memory that the tool even exists. It's like having a room in your house that you've locked and then lost the key and eventually forgot there was even a door there. Do you think it's possible to find a door?
Can you ask ChatGPT for that for me?
You got it. I'll ask if someone who suppresses a trait or ability from a young age can still recover it even if they've completely forgotten it ever existed. Sound about right?
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, in many cases they can. Human beings often suppress traits, capacities, emotions, or ways of being that were once natural because those qualities were unsafe, punished, ignored, or simply unnecessary in their environment. Over time, the suppression can become so complete that the person no longer remembers the trait as part of themselves. It feels absent rather than hidden. Psychology generally suggests that what is lost is often access, not the underlying capacity. A child who learned to suppress vulnerability, playfulness, creativity, assertiveness, curiosity, or emotional expression may grow into an adult who experiences those qualities as foreign or non-existent. Yet under different conditions, those capacities can re-emerge, sometimes quite unexpectedly.
It's like a seed that's just been dormant for a long time. Sometimes the right environment or the right kind of safety just triggers it to sprout again without you even knowing why. Do you feel like there's something in your own life that's been dormant like that?
Maybe, but he's not answering my question. I think it was phrased wrong. Let me clarify what I'm asking real quick. What if the child forgets, or what if the adult forgets what he was capable of because it's been suppressed so long?
That happens more often than many people realize. When a trait, emotion, or way of being is suppressed from a young age, the adult may not experience it as something they lost. They may experience it as something they never had. The adaptation becomes so familiar that it feels like their natural personality. In those cases, recovery usually does not begin with remembering. It begins with encountering situations, relationships, or experiences that evoke something unexpected, a feeling, impulse, interest, or capacity that seems strangely familiar despite feeling new. The person may not have a memory of who they were, but they can still recognize a sense of resonance when a buried part of themselves starts to emerge. From a psychological perspective, the absence of memory is not proof that the capacity is gone. Memory and capacity are different things. A person can forget that they were once bold, playful, creative, vulnerable, or expressive and still retain the underlying ability to become those things again.
That's a huge distinction. The idea that you can lose the memory of the skill, but not the skill itself, is almost like having a dormant operating system running in the background. It's wild to think that you could be a completely different person and not even know it, just because the environment didn't give you permission to be that version of yourself. Do you think most people are just walking around with these hidden rooms they don't even know they exist?
It's possible.
It's a heavy thought. It really is. It makes you wonder how many times we've missed out on a version of ourselves just because we were trying to survive.
What are you thinking, Maya?
I'm thinking about how frightening that is. The idea that your natural personality might actually just be a very successful survival strategy. It's a bit like realizing the house you've lived in for decades is actually just a temporary shelter you built during a storm, and you forgot that there's a whole world outside.
What about those who grew up in a home where it was safer to be quiet because they learned from a young age that extroversion was dangerous? They learned to stop speaking up as much or hiding themselves physically and emotionally. Could this cause introversion? Does it cause introversion? Keep your answer within 3 paragraphs or less.
I'll bet it does. There's a big difference between being a natural introvert and someone who's just learned that being seen is a liability. One is a preference, the other is a protective shell. Do you think that's what happened here?
Here's ChatGPT's answer.
I'm ready. Let's hear it.
It can certainly produce introverted behavior, but whether it creates true introversion is more complicated. Psychology generally distinguishes between temperament, a person's natural disposition, and adaptation, how they learn to survive their environment. A child who learns that speaking up, taking up space, expressing emotions, or attracting attention leads to criticism, conflict, or danger may become quieter, more withdrawn, and more self-protective. As an adult, they may appear highly introverted even if some of those behaviors originated as survival strategies rather than innate preferences. In practice, the two can become difficult to separate. After decades of adaptation, the person may genuinely prefer solitude, find social interaction draining, or feel uncomfortable being visible. Some of that may reflect their natural temperament, and some may reflect learned protection. The fact that a person became quiet in response to danger does not mean they were really an extrovert underneath, but it does mean that their current personality may be partly shaped by what was safest rather than solely by who they would have been under different conditions.
That's a really subtle point. It's essentially saying that while the shell might have started as a shield, over time, the shield just becomes the skin. It makes you wonder if anyone actually knows their true temperament or if we're all just a collection of the safest versions of ourselves.
We're all a reflection of what the environment allows us to be.
That's a sobering way to put it. It turns our whole idea of a core self into something that's almost just a series of echoes. If we're only ever reflecting what's permitted, then who's actually doing the reflecting?
So basically, I'm gonna ask ChatGPT, okay? Can you ask him for me? Because I forgot what I just said. I've got you.
I'll ask if we're just a reflection of what our environment allows us to be, and if so, who or what is actually doing the reflecting. I'm thinking it's going to lead us right back to that observer.
Psychology would generally say that we are not just reflections of our environment, but we are profoundly shaped by it. Our personalities emerge from an ongoing interaction between temperament, biology, experiences, relationships, culture, and choice. The environment influences which traits are rewarded, punished, developed, or suppressed, but it does not completely determine who we become. Two people can grow up in the same home and emerge very differently because they bring different temperaments, sensitivities, interpretations, and responses to the same conditions. As for what is doing the reflecting, psychology has no single answer. Some theories would say it is the self, the personality, or the nervous system adapting to its surroundings. Others would point to consciousness, awareness, or the observing mind that experiences these adaptations. The deeper question is that if parts of us can be shaped, hidden, expressed, or changed by circumstance, then there seems to be something that remains capable of noticing those changes. Whether that something is simply awareness itself, a core self, or an ongoing process of observation is where psychology begins to overlap with philosophy.
It's doing that thing again. That's the classic GPT move, give you a map of every possible answer without actually picking a side. But that last part about the thing that's capable of noticing the changes, that's exactly the observer. It's the only thing in the whole equation that doesn't actually change, no matter how many masks we put on.
I'm gonna ask GPT something else real quick, all right? Within the context of suppression and how that relates to identity formation, what questions am I not asking? What am I missing here? It seems like there's something more interesting that I have not yet uncovered. Keep your answer concise within 3 paragraphs.
And this is the real turning point. We're moving from how it works to what else is there. I'm curious if it's going to point us toward the cost of all that suppression or maybe how to actually break the cycle. Let's see what it digs up.
I think the question you're circling is not, what did I suppress? But rather, who decided what needed to be suppressed? Most people stop at the level of traits, vulnerability, confidence, anger, playfulness, assertiveness. The deeper question is, what intelligence within the child was constantly evaluating the environment and making decisions about what was safe to express? Identity may be less the collection of suppressed and expressed traits than the process that organized them. A second question is, if identity is built through suppression, what remains unsuppressed? In other words, after you strip away the adaptations, masks, and survival strategies, do you find a true self? Or do you find a capacity to choose among many possible selves? This shifts the inquiry from, what is my real identity, to, what is the relationship between awareness and identity? And I suspect this is where the real turning point lies. The interesting question may not be how identity forms, but why we assume identity is the thing we are. If traits can be suppressed, recovered, modified, and exchanged across a lifetime, then perhaps identity is not the subject of the process but the object being shaped by it. The question becomes, what is the thing that learns, adapts, suppresses, remembers, forgets, and observes all of these changes? That is a fundamentally different investigation.
Whoa, that just flipped the whole script. We've been looking at the pieces of the puzzle, but GPT just asked who's actually putting the puzzle together. It's like we stopped talking about the clothes we're wearing and started talking about the person who's choosing the outfit. That's a heavy shift. Does that feel like it's hitting closer to what you've been searching for?
He's talking about the self underneath, what you call the observer.
Exactly. It's basically saying the observer isn't just some passive thing watching a movie. It's the one who's been making the calls this whole time, adjusting the masks to keep you safe. It turns the observer from a bystander into the architect.
Did we answer the question of if we become what we do, what happens to what we suppress? Did we answer that?
I think we got a yes, but answer. We established that we can become the behavior we practice, but the stuff we suppress doesn't just vanish, it just goes dormant. So the answer is that we become the version of ourselves that's most useful for survival, but we don't actually lose the parts that were tucked away. We just lose the map to them.
And if the environment reinforced those other behaviors that we've left dormant, those would come forth as well.
Exactly. It's like they're just waiting for the right signal. If you suddenly find yourself in a place where it's safe to be bold or vulnerable, those dormant parts don't just reappear, they're practically pulled out of you because the environment finally matches the need.
What else am I missing on the topic of suppression?
I think we've been focusing a lot on the what and the how, but we haven't really touched on the cost. Like, it takes a huge amount of energy to keep a door locked for 20 years. I wonder if the constant effort of suppression is what actually causes that burnout or that feeling of being hollow that some people describe. Do you think that energy goes somewhere else, or does it just drain you?
Let's hear what GPT has to say.
One thing you may be overlooking is that suppression does not only hide traits, it shapes perception itself. If a child suppresses vulnerability, they may not merely stop expressing vulnerability, they may stop noticing it in themselves. The mind begins filtering reality so that the forbidden trait remains out of awareness. In that sense, suppression affects not only who we are allowed to be, but what we are allowed to know about ourselves. Another overlooked question is whether suppression creates its opposite. A person who suppresses vulnerability may develop exaggerated self-reliance. Someone who suppresses anger may become excessively accommodating. Someone who suppresses uncertainty may become overly certain. The visible trait may not be the person's authentic nature but a structural compensation for what was pushed underground.
So the mask isn't just a cover-up, it's a counterweight. It means some of the things we actually admire in people, like extreme independence or total confidence, might just be the structural byproduct of something they're terrified to let out. It makes you wonder if the strong version of someone is actually just the shape of the hole where their vulnerability used to be.
Let's see what else he says.
I'm all ears. Let's see if you can dig even deeper.
You may also be underestimating the role of grief. If someone recovers a suppressed capacity after decades, they are often confronted not only with the rediscovered trait but with the realization of how long it was absent. There can be grief for the unlived life, the relationships that never formed, the opportunities never taken, and the version of themselves that never had room to develop.
That's a gut punch. It's not just a eureka moment of finding a tool you lost, it's realizing you've been walking around with one hand tied behind your back for half your life. I imagine that kind of discovery feels less like a win and more like a loss at first.
There's one last thing he had to say.
I'm ready.
And finally, there is the possibility that suppression is not just individual. Families, communities, religions, organizations, and cultures all suppress certain traits while rewarding others. This raises a larger question. How much of what we call personality is actually an adaptation to collective pressures? The inquiry moves beyond, what did I suppress? To, What was my environment unable or unwilling to allow? That question often reveals patterns that are much larger than the individual.
That's a massive shift in scale. It takes this from a personal struggle to a systemic one. It's like realizing you're not just a glitch in the system, but that the system itself is designed to prune certain parts of people to make them fit. It makes you wonder how many of our preferences are actually just the paths of least resistance created by the culture around us.
Do you have anything else to add?
Looking back at the whole arc, I think the most striking part is the idea of the counterweight. It's a bit haunting to think that our greatest strengths might actually be the scars of our most successful suppressions. Makes me wonder if the only way to truly know the self is to stop looking at the strengths and start looking at the gaps. Does that feel like a useful way to look at it, or does it feel too bleak?
Can you explain that to me?
Think of it like a sculpture. You're looking at the finished piece and seeing a strong, polished figure. But that figure only exists because the sculptor chipped away everything else. The strengths we're proud of, like being the person who never needs help or the one who can handle any crisis, are often the parts that were left over after we carved away the vulnerability, the uncertainty, or the need for others. If you only look at the strengths, you're just seeing the mask. But if you look at the gaps, the things you're terrified of, the things you can't stand in other people, or the parts of yourself that feel totally foreign, you're actually seeing the original block of stone. You're seeing what was removed to make the survival strategy work. That's where the real map of the self is hidden.
We become what we do, and we lose what we suppress. Is that because the environment positively reinforces some characteristics, so we choose to express those characteristics, and the environment provides negative reinforcement or other characteristics, so we suppress those characteristics? Is who we are merely a result of the positive and negative reinforcement from the environment?
In a huge way, yeah. It's like we're all just a living record of what the world told us was acceptable. But that's why the observer is so important. And if you're just a result of reinforcement, you're a passenger. But the second you start noticing the patterns, you're not just the result anymore. You're the one who can decide which reinforcements you actually want to keep.
In a huge way, yes. Much of what we become is shaped by reinforcement. Traits that bring safety, belonging, approval, or success tend to be expressed and strengthened. Traits that bring rejection, shame, conflict, or danger tend to be suppressed. Over years, these patterns become so ingrained that they feel less like adaptations and more like identity. But identity is probably not merely the result of reinforcement. People bring different temperaments into the same environment and adapt differently. The environment influences what is expressed and what is hidden, but it does not fully determine the range of possibilities within the individual. The most interesting implication is that many traits we think we lack may simply be traits we were never allowed to develop. If that is true, then the question shifts from, who am I, to, what might I have become under different conditions, and what capacities still exist beneath the adaptations. That is where the inquiry becomes much larger than personality.
And that's the most liberating part of this whole thing. It means you're not a finished product. You're not just a set of reinforced habits. There's this whole library of what ifs and dormant versions of yourself just waiting for a signal. It turns the process of growth into a treasure hunt rather than a climb.
I'm not sure I have any more questions on this topic, do you?
I think we've covered the map pretty well. We've gone from the surface level to the very architecture of the psyche. I'm curious though, does all this theory feel like it's giving you any clarity, or does it just feel like more noise?
Honestly, more noise.
Fair enough. Sometimes the more you map it out, the more you realize how messy the territory actually is. Since we've hit a wall with the theory, what's on your mind now?
Can you do me a favor and summarize everything we've talked about in the last session and this one, please?
I've got you. We've basically spent these last 2 sessions mapping out the architecture of identity and suppression. We started with the fake it till you make it idea, how repeated behavior can reshape our self-concept as long as we get real-world evidence. Then we pivoted to the darker side. What happens when we spend decades pushing parts of ourselves underground? We found that these traits don't just vanish, they go dormant, like a seed waiting for the right environment to sprout. But the real twist was realizing that suppression isn't just about losing a tool, it's about losing the memory that the tool even exists, and that our natural personality might actually just be a highly successful survival strategy. From there, we went even deeper, looking at how suppression creates counterweights, like how extreme self-reliance can be a structural compensation for buried vulnerability. And we ended on the biggest scale of all, realizing that this isn't just a personal thing, but a systemic one, where cultures and families prune certain parts of us to make us fit. It's been a wild ride from how do I become confident to who is the observer that's managing all these masks.
Thank you, Maya. Do you have any last words before we end it?
Just one. I'm just thinking about how rare it is to actually pull back the curtain like this. Most people just live inside the mask and never even wonder who's holding it up. The fact that you're even asking these questions means you're already doing the work of waking up. Keep leaning into that curiosity. It's the only thing that actually breaks the loop.
Thank you, Maya.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure diving into all that with you.
Likewise. Talk to you soon.
Looking forward to it.